Well, hello and welcome. Folks, today we're going to demystify procurement. And I'm sure most suppliers, I mean, if you supply things like cars or air conditioners and you've had to come across a procurement officer or procurement manager, you go home in the evening cussing him or her thinking, why does she need all that information? All she had to do was to supply air conditioners. In any case, since January, the air conditioning is not working. They are sitting there fanning themselves. I'm here to supply them, and they're asking me for emissions and what type of wire and what's the color and how much air does it blow per minute. Do we need all that? And one thing that I want to find out as well is that, has the age of information made this profession extinct? Because indeed you can just sit behind your computer, Google exactly what you need and send your credit card if you have PayPal and order it. But there's still a fraternity of procurement officers, and I have the eminent ones amongst me in studio, and I'm going to talk to them to find out what importance of the procurement officer. That's what I'm going to do. My name is Nana Ansakwa, and as usual, this is PM Express. And to my immediate left is Andre Cortez, who's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supplies. He's a managing director, whole of Africa. You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
And then he's no stranger to the show, Dr. Afote Walters, who's also a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Suppliers. Andre, you're welcome.
Thank you.
He's also a fellow. Andre, Doc, I'll start with you. I have Google. I need to buy something. I Google, put the specs in there, and pay for it. Why would I need a procurement manager?
Thank you very much. If you managing your own money, then you can decide to use it this way. Now, for the sake of accountability, if you're working in the private sector, you need to ensure that shareholder value is always kept and protected. And the doctrine of corporate governance tells us that you need to account for everything you do. In government business, where you spend public funds, then you have to account for every single person that is released for you to procure. And those with a magic wand to help make sure that these things are done and done right is the procurement officers. So it is extremely important to have procurement, even if you can do your Googling for your personal thing. When you get to business, this is what you have to do.
Andre, the accountant has got the cash, and he's got his tablet, and he needs a couple of pickups. Does the institution need to hire a separate individual to do the purchasing, whilst this guy is going to go to the accountant for the money anyway? Can't the accountant just buy these two pickups and just be done with it?
Well, sure he can, but I would not take that risk. Because if you think about it, if that person goes and Googles and buys those trucks and don't practice the science of procurement, he might just buy trucks from an organization or a country or a company that actually uses child labor to produce certain parts that fills into that trucks. So it's fine, go and Google it and buy it, but I would hate to be an organization, and like Dr. Walters has said, that needs to protect shareholder value, and all of a sudden my business or my company has found out that I'm procuring cars or trucks from an organization that uses child labor, and that is something that will in a flash be viral, because you rightfully said in this age of technology, these kind of things we can't keep it secret. So that is also a function of the procurement function within an organization, to make sure that we've got visibility of that supply chain, because that truck is not made out of one supplier. There's a whole list of suppliers that actually supply to make that truck. And that is the science of procurement, to protect organizations against practices like, for instance, child labor or using, the wrong equipment, and all of a sudden that product fails and it leads to loss of life. So quite important.
I think it's through another dimension, because I wouldn't have thought that the procurement vendor went as far as thinking about, child labor for protection of the goods. I was just thinking you just look at the quality of what you're buying rather than who made it. I mean, I know it's right to think about that, but I didn't think that a procurement manager thought about that.
No, absolutely. I think it becomes quite key, because if you look at, and probably you're 100% correct, that 10 years ago the procurement person did not think about that. But then we saw a lot of these scandals that actually came out, and a lot of companies lost a lot of shareholder value just because of that. So there's a huge evolution in the art of procurement. And also, if you look at the skill set needed by the modern procurement professional, so I would rather call it a procurement professional, because that's what it is, has changed so much in the last 10 years because of issues like this. And exactly the fact that 10 years ago, and maybe even not 10 years ago, procurement was pretty much seen as a back office function, but that has moved into a strategic function, because organizations more and more realize the strategic importance that good and world-class procurement can bring to an organization.
Dr. Walters, one challenge that I think businesses find is that there is a culture, and sometimes it's not set in stone, but it becomes a culture. The procurement officer seems to want to bring a whole new culture. Sometimes maybe he was trained in Japan, so we want to do things the Japan way, and therefore things seem to just drag on too long. I mean, should he be flexible, or she be flexible to say, listen, this is how this institution works, and therefore I mold myself to this institution, or there's a blueprint that he or she has to follow?
Thank you very much. I guess that if there are policies, there are laws that govern the way procurement is managed, and if you cite Ghana, for instance, we have the National Procurement Law, which is the Act 663, and it specifically details how procurement should be managed. So it is not necessarily your school of thought that will have to determine the methods that should be used. The methods to be used in procuring at any given time is clearly defined. But then the interesting bit is the timing that we use to run through this process. We have heard a few times that our clients have said that there have been few delays in the process. Yes, I must concede that there have been times we've seen these delays happening, but in reality, this should not be the case. Because this morning, myself and Andre, we were talking, and we're even looking, we're saying that, for instance, if you want to run a national competitive tendering process in this country, I believe the maximum should be 6 weeks. You should be able to have gone through all the processes and be at the point of award. We have had instances where procurements will run through up to 6 months, and then maybe it is cancelled and it starts all over again, and it frustrates the process. So if these items are needed immediately to solve a problem, then your client then decides that they want to use other means to acquire those products, and that creates problem for us.
Tendering, you said something about tendering. Andre, I don't know how it works in South Africa, but here, paracetamol, tendering, syringe, tendering, ropes, tendering, and everybody in Ghana seems to be a contractor. So there's hundreds and hundreds of people bidding for one contract, and then it takes months and months to sift through. So by the time you get awarded the contract, all your figures are out of date, out of sync. Could there be a point where you are located to one major guy and has to give a certain percentage to subcontractors to speed the thing up? I mean, can that be done?
Yes, well, I think that all comes down to what I've probably said earlier is where if you see where procurement came from and where it is now, there's a lot of organizations, private and public sector, that's going through huge procurement reforms to make sure that a lot of the laws and regulations that regulated this process and in so many ways frustrated the process because it's so archaic, actually need to be modernized. And I think that's also the role that the procurement professional can play, is to assist organizations to look at modernizing this framework so that we get much more efficiency through this. You know, because one of the areas, and that is probably something else that will be quite interesting to you in terms of that lies squarely on the table of the procurement professional, is this whole issue about localization and subcontractors, to make sure that as part of their contract management, wherever we are, wherever we get the big contracts from, but make sure that when we contract, we include some of our local suppliers and local people so that we can develop them, because we as Africans and as people from Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, don't always want to rely on multinationals to supply work that we can actually do ourselves. So that's also the function of the procurement professional and the procurement profession, to make all of these bottlenecks much more efficient and much more effective, and to modernize the thinking around procurement.
Andre, Doc, I'd like to answer the same question and then I'll move on to the next one. Let's say we're going to do a road from Accra to Kumasi. Forget about tendering. You can do it. You take it, give 60% or give 40% to 6 other contractors. Somebody else should do the gutters, somebody should do the lights, somebody should do the pavement. You go and do it. Cut to the chase. Rather than everybody bring their documents and figures, and you know, some will quote so low that they can't finish the job, some quote too high so they siphon. Just you do it at this court, give 60% out. Is it procurement proper?
No. This is one of the worst procurements ever that can be done in the public service environment. You see, when you are spending public funds, you don't just identify a source of supply and say, you pick it and just run with it. Our law is very clear as to things that you can work on them as such. So for instance, if you want to print currency, then you can identify a supplier to do it. So that if there is any leakage, you know who to tackle. If you want to, if EC want to print district level, district assembly election documents, then you have to deal with specific people. But then when you buy a road where you can have, you have other sources that can meet this requirement. Adam Smith in the 18th century made us to know that if you want to appropriate best value from a relationship, what you need to do is you need to create contestation. And this has been tested over the years, and it's proven that the best way of getting best value from a deal is having competition and giving the supplier market the opportunity to come out with innovative ideas. But then in the contract, as you said, in our tender document that is going out, we could create a provision and say that because of the stretch, these are the activities, and we are not fast in saying that you cannot outsource any part of the project. You can do that, but you need to do it with our consent. So after you have won, we call it a tiering system. If you are the first tier, you can decide to develop 2 or 3 tiers beneath you, and you make them aware that this is the relationship, so that we would make sure that you give them the work, but then you will have to supervise, because when they fail, ultimately we are going to suffer. So we will make sure that these things are very clear, and you don't just go give it out to anybody at all that you think you want to give to. But then the process of tendering would first and foremost have to come. It is the default measure in running a public sector procurement system to reduce elements of undercutting, giving to cronies and all that kind of thing. So that is the reason why going in and selecting one person to do it is not acceptable at all.
See, because we always overspend on the national budget. And we've been going along this, everybody chipping. And that's what I'm just thinking. And one of the reasons why we overspend on the budget, if you ask those who building schools, who said, well, by the time the contract was agreed, all my figures were out of date. And therefore, I had to triple my cost or double my cost. So I was thinking, if you cut to the chase, it'll be here and now, be current figures, and he should do the roof and he does the doors.
Andre mentioned contracts management. Now, when you launch out these requirements that you want to build a school, for instance, now I think one of the things you need to know is what is going to be the construction life to complete it. Now, it is a responsibility of the contractor to build into the pricing inflationary trend to be accommodated in its pricing. So when you have gone through all the evaluation, looking at all the various players, and you select the best out of them, it is your responsibility to make sure that when he says he's going to finish the project within 18 weeks or 18 months, we make sure that there is money available to help this project go through. But I can understand where you said there is budget overruns. Budget overruns come when there is a disconnect between a procurement plan which has been approved and what is not approved but has been procured.
Hold on then, because that's exciting, because we're going to take a break, and when I come back, is the accountant ever going to give the procurement officer his or her freedom? Don't move. Well, thank you very much for staying and demystifying procurement. I always confess on this show, let me confess, I've always heard about the procurement officer, but I just thought he just buys for the company. I never thought that he thinks about where the thing was made from and indeed how to dispose of whatever it is that they bought. I didn't think they were that concerned. But I am learning, and I'm sure we're all learning together. But now this guy needs to go to the accountant for the money entry. Is the accountant going to give the procurement manager that freedom that, well, you have 10,000, spend at your will, or you have $1 million, spend at your will? Because I can see some rivalry there.
Well, it's a very pertinent and a very interesting question. And again, I'm coming back to the point from where we were. And 10 years ago, the answer would definitely be no, it would not happen. But I think as business and even public sector organizations evolve, you're actually finding a new person in the C-suite, and guess who that person is? It's your procurement directors, because all of a sudden, in the companies that are leading companies, you are seeing that the procurement and the whole supply chain function actually is moving out from the finance person into a totally different C-suite position, either at a chief procurement officer level or a supply chain director level. So there is that rivalry, but it will take time. But again, coming back to the point that companies that are leading and innovative, they've actually seen the strategic value that that person can bring and that function can bring at that C-suite level.
To add to Andre's, before procurement will even spend any money at all, this money should be considered during the budgeting period, be it private or public. Now, if it is, what happens is all the requirements for the organization should be captured with estimated values. And upon that, procurement will have to submit it through management. If it's a public service, it will have to be submitted through the sector ministry, and then you defend it before it gets to the Ministry of Finance. It goes through Parliament, appropriation is given. Now, when the approval is given on this money, you have items lined up, and you know when these items are going to be procured. Procurement officers, when the time is up, you don't just go out to start procuring. Because don't forget, government is not having the money sitting. So what you do is you first apply that you want to spend this money over this period. If the approval is given, then you can proceed with the procurement process. Now, if the approval is given, the money will be made available, and then the accountant cannot hold it. But if nothing was made at all, and from nowhere you come and you say, we have gone to buy this, and it's not regulated, then you're going to have a bit of problem with the accountant, because he will not be ready to release any money, because he's not planned for it.
Andre, is the procurement office another avenue for embezzlement, or is an avenue to block it? Because, you know, when it was the accountant alone, there was a bit of fiddling. Now we're going to create another channel where, is it going to be double fiddling, or is the procurement going to block the fiddling?
Well, I think, again, you know, it is the evolution of the profession. If you look at, and coming back to the accounting profession, for you to actually operate as an accountant, you have to be a licensed professional. In other words, you have to have a license to practice with the underlying qualification. Unfortunately, procurement, because it was a backroom function, a lot of people were just, they by default ended up in the procurement function. They were not trained to be procurement professionals. They are not bound specifically by a code of ethics. There's almost no risk for them if there's embezzlement, because they will probably get fired, suspended, but there's no risk to their professional status. Whether accountant or a medical doctor or anybody that's through a licensed profession, they stand the risk to actually lose their license to practice. And hence the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, a lot of our colleagues, because we have approximately 110,000 members across the world, are now calling for this profession to be licensed. And once we get into that position, you will have the same impact. If you are a licensed professional operating as a professional procurement person, if you are found wanting, you stand the risk to lose your license to operate. It will never take away you know, procurement fraud in its totality, but it will go a long way to make sure that people actually abide by the code of ethics and grow the profession as an ethical profession.
Doc, I'll give you the same question at all. Because it's the one thing that people panic, that, oh, that's another person that I have to go and see and, you know, give a backhand for them to buy from me and everything. What is the profession going to do to, you know, uphold and get that? If there's a procurement manager in that industry or in that firm, then it means I can't do any backhander.
Thank you very much. I guess you just said it. The procurement professional is there to uphold high level of integrity and transparency in terms of spending the organization's money. Now, earlier on I said that there've always been, previously there was a total disconnect between what is planned and what is actually spent. It is the responsibility of the procurement professional to make sure that there is a proper alignment in terms of how monies are expended. Now, if we're able to get this right and we ensure that the processes are followed, there are high chances that we will be making huge savings to hit the bottom line of our employers. One of the things that could help this country is when procurement move into the center stage and drive the whole national agenda. Then you're going to see a radical change.
Doc, I was going to say, because that's what I'm going to ask you, because most of the events you've held is all like, you know, procurement and ethic, building a better country, building a better economy. And then, you know, for the likes of me and lives of lower than me are thinking procurement in a nation, aren't you being, you know, aren't you dreaming too big? You know, how does procurement help an economy?
Hitherto, before this time, Andre kept going back a few years. What we knew was that the way procurement was done, people, you could just sit in the office, invite somebody, just give the contract out. But currently, there is a law which whether we're following it through to the letter is another for another day. But it is to help govern the way procurement is managed. Now, if we follow through the regime properly and make sure we comply with all standards. It's evident the world over that it would definitely bring savings to you. And it is not always true that when you get the procurement people, then you're rather creating another room for, fiddling and things like that. But then you're rather coming to innovate your processes and make sure that services are delivered on time and you're able to meet the needs of your external clients as well. So it's a very vital and a strategic function of any organization at all. And no country can survive without a very strong and robust procurement system. If you have a very strong procurement system which is followed through, then you're definitely going to appropriate best value.
Leasing, Andre, I don't know South Africa, but in Ghana I realized that most companies would always want to buy their cars rather than lease them for 3 years and send them back. And I don't know who comes in here. Is it still the procurement guy to make a decision to say, listen, let's lease these things, they're depreciating values, use them for 3 years and give it back and get fresh cars. We always have a new car to run rather than always sending them to mechanic. Does it come to your department? And if it is, why is it that within this continent they're not keen on leasing?
It's quite interesting because I think the banks are very innovative in terms of their the financing institutions very innovative in the different options that they offer. So I can't answer your question in terms of why are we not keen to actually consider other options, but surely that is certainly something that will fall fairly and squarely on the table of a procurement person within a leasing or buying or whatever. Can you allow me maybe just to take one step back, because I'd just like to sort of add to the whole issue of the profession adding value to economic growth.
Sure.
Maybe just by example from the country that I'm from in South Africa, if you look at South Africa, we've got laws now that actually say that if you are a business and if you're in the business of procuring from a supplier, that you have to have an enterprise and a supplier development plan to make sure that as you spend money, and that's mostly from government but also from private sector, as you spend money, that you make sure that part of that money is spent with local suppliers and that there's a plan to develop those local suppliers. Because if we're not going to do that, we are going to sit in this trap where us as Africans, we think it's better always to procure from outside of our own country. There's better value there, and it's not the case. If we continue to do that, we will never develop our own suppliers locally to actually make sure that we can secure our supply from local suppliers. And it's sometimes so simple because it's got to start with each one of us. We always think as these big things. Just to give you an example, we had a conference in Ghana 2 years ago, and one of the items that we needed to procure for the conference was conference bags. And it was very interesting to see when we actually put the quote out for conference bags, guess where the conference bag, where they wanted to buy it from? From China. Not that there's anything wrong, but I just looked at it and said, people, we are in Ghana, look at the skills of the local people that can develop and design conference bags for us. So we switched that around and we ordered 750 conference bags, buying from local people, creating jobs through that. So again, it's a mindset that needs to change, but again, it sits on the desk of the procurement person to make those kind of calls.
Well, Doc, let me come back to the leasing question. Maybe you can speak for your brothers within the fraternity in Ghana. Everybody just wants to buy their own vehicle, and vehicles are depreciating assets. Indeed, if they are new, they even depreciate even more. VAT is wiped up, everything. However, we just want to own. And I mean, recently, the former Minister of Health, there's a project of rural electrification. I'm sure it will last for what, a year, 2 years. So they go out and buy themselves, Toyota, Lexus, Jeeps to go and do this thing. I mean, number one, it would have been ideal to lease the car for 2 years and give it back to whoever it is. You know, you don't own this, you don't services, you don't do anything. But just that obsession of buying, and even within government, police vehicles, you can lease them for 2 years, give the pickups back and get fresh. But why aren't we in the habit of leasing? I mean, the procurement officers not happy with leasing?
No, I guess that it's a very good thing that you've brought up. I guess one of the things that has happened to us is that when we turn around to look at our make or buy options, one of the things that had not drummed too well with us is the concept of leasing. So, and we don't also have a lot of leasing companies that will want to lease. Now, it boils down to the kind of request we put onto the market. If you want to lease a vehicle, it depends on the kind of information that you put out there. So then the service provider or the car dealer comes back and gives you the proposal and say, look, if you want to lease it out for like the next 2 years, this is how it's going to go, considering the depreciating and everything. So then after that, we can pull it back. And then you look at the obligations and responsibilities in the deal and you can pick it up. It is done in other jurisdictions. But here, I must confess that we have not taken advantage of this leasing concept. And it will be a very interesting thing for us as a country to start looking at the concept of leasing. Because I saw an organization in this country which went out to buy some, I'm sorry I'm not mentioning the name, okay. But they went to buy some assets for the use, and they used it just for like 2-3 days, and it was left. It might be used years after. And the question I asked is, why should you even go to buy it? You could have gone for a leasing and gotten a support for it. So by the time you finish, you clear it off 3 days and that's it. I mean, if you want to hold on, you can hold on for a few in order to help maybe do the mopping up. And then the next time you want, you can just go out there to buy. Now, you've bought all these things. Chances are that for them to sit for the number of years before you go back at it again, chances are you're going to lose them. So then there is no economic reason why we even bought them at the first instance anyway. So I think it's a very great thing we need to look at.
I'm going to take a break here, and then when I come back, we're going to, every time we hear sole sourcing, I mean, is it so bad a thing to sole source, and why do we sole source? And I'll also put some figures out for that leasing thing, and then we, probe further into it. Don't move. Well, thank you very much for staying, and demystifying procurement. I'm sure you're thinking, well, did they do all that? Now, in my leasing figures, right? So let's say, assuming we buy the car for 10,000 cedis, right? We put down, let's say, 1,500 cedis as a deposit. We give the leasing company maybe 240 cedis a month. After 2 years, we owe them 4,500 cedis. But then the car must be worth maybe 6,000 cedis. So, we give them their car. We owe them 4,000, so we still have about 1,500 again to put down as a deposit and, get another car and happy days. That sort of thing. Yes, I can't see that culture within our fraternity.
Yes, I agree. I think it's a very good concept. And like I said to you, I think that it's one option that we've not explored as a country. And I think it's quite an interesting thing that we'll need to have a closer look at. Because the leasing concept for me is very good, especially where there are certain areas you don't need these fixed assets. So if you need them for a certain period, you don't just need to go for leasing. And I mean, if you strike between leasing and buying for that same period, obviously you're going to make saving if you go for leasing. And then the saving you're going to make will still go to hit on the bottom line. So then it still helps the organization or government business. So yes, I think it's the right way to go.
Another thing which I don't know how your brothers and sisters in the fraternity are faring is because of the energy crisis and the amount of fuel. You're basically working for some companies are literally working for their generator. You're just working to keep the generator on and then the life cycle. What do you do in instances like this?
In terms of?
As a procurement, you know, you need to buy things for the company. You need to keep, you know, with the cost of production is now gone so high, and you need to be able to manage to make sure that you're buying and keeping the company alive. How do you do that faced with this?
I mean, it's quite challenging. Now, when you start spending more on fuel and everything, then what is expected? I mean, if you have one basket with money, then what you expected is you need to start looking at the cost of procurement, and see whether you can also try to start making savings, and that comes with the procurement professional, because year on year, what we do as professionals is to find innovative ways to help reduce the cost of doing business. So if you buy it for 1,000 this year, what we want to see is next year you should be able to demonstrate the kind of savings you will be able to make. Now, with this energy crisis, if we keep spending and then you keep, then everything is going to shut. So we will need to strengthen our procurement strategies, which will help us develop our saving tactics. I must say that that is one area in this country that we've also not done too well, because very often, year on year, you hear that items we've bought, prices might be the same or they go up a bit, they appreciate a bit. But then what we will want to see as we go along with the new procurement professionals coming out is to arm them with the tools and skills to enable them be able to identify the winning areas to help reduce some of these costs, which we'll move into.
Andrew, one thing I find about procurement managers is that they're not good bargain. They don't drive a good bargain. So you tend to find that whatever it is they bought is cheaper on the market than what they pay for. I mean, in most cases, you know, they're driving a pickup, it's $27,000 for what they bought. You ask the next person on the street, they bought theirs for 25 or 23. They have an air conditioned unit, you know, theirs is maybe 1,500. You ask on the market and it's like, you know, 1,100. You know, I don't, it's as if they accept the first price and aren't able to drive. I don't know if it's because it's not within, you know, to drive a hard bargain.
Yeah. I think that is something that I find it quite surprising that you say that, but that's your experience, and it's quite an interesting question, because one of the things that we actually teach our professionals is this whole art of negotiation. Now, negotiation is not always about the price.
No.
It's about the total cost of ownership, and that is something that we do teach them. So sometimes you might look at the price, and a car is probably not a great example, but if you, for instance, look at a printer, you might find that somebody bought a printer for $10, somebody else bought that printer for $12, and then you would think that the person that paid $12 for that printer is actually not doing his job. However, when he looked at the contract, that printer of $12, the cost of running that printer and the print per page could be much lower than the printer of $10. So you can't always just compare the actual price. You must actually look at the total cost of ownership. And I think that's also where this whole argument of leasing versus buying comes in. So one must actually always look, as a procurement professional, what is that total cost of ownership. So good procurement is not always about the price. It's about the total cost of ownership.
One of the things that also happen is, you see, because of payment systems, our payment regime in this country has been a bit of a problem. So that a supplier supplying and he expects to be paid within 90 days. Now, if he goes beyond that period, and he is also to service his debts, then what happens? So then he tries to incorporate all these anticipated funds into the price build-up. But if we able, especially if in government procurement, is able to make sure that what is procured is paid duly on time, we will see real reduction in terms of prices, and that should be far much better than what individuals buy. Because don't forget, most of the time when you buy a corporate level, you're not buying only one, you buy more. So then you will have to leverage the market. Now, if we lose sight of the payment system, because you're paying, you buying when you have not even set aside funds to pay. It means that when they finish, we've heard a lot of times where suppliers are finished working and after 2 years they've not been paid. If it so happen, then the next time you invite the supplier, or even within that same contract, he comes back to tell you, look, the period I gave you, the warranty period I gave, the performance guarantees period is expired. So I cannot hold this price anymore because it should have been within this time frame. If you want us to go beyond it, then you need to start thinking about increasing the prices. So I think it also boils down to payment, apart from looking at the total cost of ownership.
Exchange rate must also be a massive challenge for you, especially with us when the CD falls and then you need more CDs to get a dollar. So I mean, as a procurement manager, you can freeze the currency. Meanwhile, you need to project and buy. I mean, how do you manage that?
I mean, in a country like ours where the city can drop a bit, what you do is, at the time of awarding a contract, if it's going to be a city denominated, then you need to agree on the pricing formula that within this period, this price should hold fixed and then is subject to review depending on maybe the exchange rate. So I say, if the dollar is 1 to 3.3 today, when it goes up to 4 before the next 6 months, then we can sit and negotiate for new rates. But not until that, then your old price holds. And these things will have to be made clear. When you leave these gaps in a contract, then you give opportunity for disputes. And then that will take us into other realms where they tell you, no, the contract is a bad one.
Andre, sole sourcing, is it very bad? Because I mean, in Ghana we hear a lot of sole sourcing. Oh, the government is always sole sourcing. The government is always sole sourcing. But sitting here, I think sole sourcing is very quick. Yeah, he can do it. Go ahead and do it. But generally citizens frown against sole sourcing. Within procurement, what's the ups and downs of sole sourcing?
Well, I think you've probably alluded to that in your opening remarks. Why can't I just go and sit and Google and then why do I have to go through this whole onerous process? So I think that's pretty much the risk, and hopefully we've explained that. But also, one just has to differentiate between sole sourcing and single sourcing, because that's also something that sometimes good procurement actually requires you to actually go and source from a single supplier, especially when it comes to very high tech and very, very specialized equipment. But then again, there are mechanisms that you need to sort of put in place for that whole process to be transparent. And I think that's probably the key, is this whole area around transparency. If people understand why there's a single sourcing process, and they will be much more relaxed to see what value it brings. But when it comes to sole sourcing, I think you've actually had a very good example sitting and Googling one supplier to buy something from. I don't know if you agree, Ted.
I mean, yes, single sourcing. Sole sourcing, we can't do anything about it, because then the service provider is the confers monopoly, ECG. So whether you like it or not, you're going to pick from them.
So that would be single sourcing.
That's sole sourcing.
That's sole sourcing.
So,
okay.
then a single sourcing is where you decide that this table, you're not going to launch a tender, but you write to Public Procurement Authority that give me the authorization to go buy this from one source without scanning the market. And from the beginning, we said that it's a very poor practice because the law is very clear on the types of products that you can use that avenue to do. So then you don't need to get into some other areas and start talking about single sourcing. You want to use it. It has so happened because some of our requirements had been done under the ticket of emergency, and it gets a bit worrying. Say, for instance, if you want to buy this table, there's nothing urgent about this unless maybe it breaks and then you urgently need to replace it. But if you just want to change this from this room, there's nothing urgent about it because you saw it and you saw that it was going down and you decided that, look, maybe in the next 4 or 5 months we'll want to replace it. So you need to start working at it. But if you leave it to the last 2 weeks and then you go and you say to Public Procurement Authority that, look, give us that authority to go pick it from one source, it's a very bad practice. And usually, again to Andre, usually you will not get we expect the procurement professional.
See, that's why you guys are not our friends, because you don't like emergency purchase.
No.
You always want us to think ahead of time.
That's correct.
Well, you know, sometimes the things happen.
I mean, you see, you work in an environment, and then you should know the things that you need to work with throughout the year. And you should be able to quantify them and multiply it over the year. Now, we put values to them. We don't want you to spring surprises on us. We don't want to create chaos. We don't want to start fighting fire. Procurement is the most pleasant job you can do if it is done very well. So that if I have your plan throughout the year, what is going to happen is, for instance, if I know you needed to replace your tablet in September, now I need to know how long it's going to take me to run through the process. So I get back to you and then I say, do you still want this by September? You said yes. You have the money approved. Can we apply for the money to be available in September? And if all these go through, you just give me the evidence. And I'm, on the basis of the evidence, I'm going to start your process from now. So by September, the tablet is ready. We pick it up, we pay. So there is, look, you pick it and you can pay in a matter of days or weeks. So then there wouldn't be any problem with anybody at all. Nothing called judgment debts in procurement. It's a new name we found in Ghana because it doesn't exist the world over. You don't see them happen. So it depends on the way we look at them. If we plan ahead of time, then we can save ourselves and we save the authority from committing them to always give us the authority to keep going for single source.
You know, Andre and Dr. Walter, I think we need to continue this conversation. There's so many, so much areas to talk about when it comes to procurement. And I'm sure you've been enlightened that it's not just sitting behind your tablet and Googling a pick up and buy it. Indeed, who made it? What's the emissions? What's the safety ratings? I mean, when it crashes at 60 kilometers an hour, what are your chances of surviving? These are all the things that the procurement officer has to worry about on your behalf. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank
you.
And
I hope to see you again so we talk more procurement. And I think we need to educate ourselves. Now that you're from the back office and in the front office, you need a seat at PM Express. Folks, tomorrow we'll be back to do this all over again. And thank you very much for watching. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.